Welcome to Understanding the Transition to Kindergarten. Here we go. So just to start out, we'll say a little bit about Matrix. Matrix Parent Network, many of you may be familiar with us. Our intent is to work to empower families with children of special needs to understand the systems that are there to support them. However, we're not attorneys or advocates. Let's keep that in mind, but we are here to help you develop your advocacy skills and to become role models for your kids. So who are we?
My name is Erica, and I'm a parent advisor at Matrix.
I've been at Matrix for over 2 years, and I've been so grateful to work with my wonderful coworkers and wonderful families. Margaret, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, this is Margaret, and I'm a senior parent advisor here at Matrix. I've been here for a while, almost 9 years now. I joined a support group at Matrix when my kids were having lots of issues in middle school primarily. And through that support group, position became open. I started working at Matrix, and it's been great. I really love working here. I have 2 kids with special needs, and fortunately for me, they're both out of high school and on their own, so I don't have to personally be doing the online learning that most of you are struggling with at the current time.
So today, we hope that you will leave here knowing what happens before the transition to kindergarten, a little bit about whether your child should be assessed for kindergarten readiness, how you can prepare and also contribute to this process, how to review potential placement options, and what to consider when you're visiting, how to prepare yourself and your child for the start of kindergarten and the transition to kindergarten, and the importance of self-care. So life is a series of transitions, whether we like it or not. There's the small transitions like your little one's going from crawling to creeping, bottle to sippy cup, or big transitions. Preschool to kindergarten, I would say, is a big transition. Childhood to adolescence, and then, those transitions, they just keep on coming. Some of those transitions can be gradual, and we may be so immersed in it that we don't even realize that the change has happened, whereas other transitions have rituals and ceremonies and are very apparent. And some transitions we choose, while others are thrust upon us, whether we like it or not. So your child's transition to kindergarten is the ending of one stage and the beginning of another new stage. Kindergarten readiness is an important part of this, and that we will talk about. And just to remember that as your child changes, your child's special education needs may change as well. There's going to be some new systems and structures, some ones you leave behind, and many new experiences to prepare for in elementary school. We're just going to take a minute to think about change and how we approach it. Some of us enjoy it, some of us thrive on it, we're energized by it. That's not really me. I fall in the dreading, protesting any change, but there's no way around it. We have to adapt to change, and having a positive approach to coping and adjusting to change is a valuable skill for ourselves, and that we can model for our children as they grow and have changes that they go through as well. Okay, well, thanks for taking that moment to reflect. I think that can be hard to remember to do. So now we will dive in, and Margaret is going to take us on a tour of IDEA.
So some of you have kids in a special ed preschool, you may or may not, but it's particularly important, since you're going to have a lot of IEP meetings in your future, to learn just a little bit about special education law. As you may know, most of special education is governed by a federal law called the Individuals with Disability Education Act, which we refer to as IDEA. And there's 6 primary principles, which we've shown on this slide, and we're going to talk about each one just very briefly. We're not going to do a deep dive into these because we have other trainings that are more specifically oriented to understanding the whole IEP process. And we also have a lot of information on our website, information packets about special education and various aspects of it. So I'm just going to touch on each one of these when we go to the next slide, but we're not going to go into these in any deep way. I'm going to start with assessment and go counterclockwise around this slide. So first of all, IDEA says that your child is entitled to an unbiased and valid assessment. And the assessment should uncover what their needs are and their strengths. And so that's the beginning of the process, the assessment. It also says that every child is owed a free, appropriate public education. And this is abbreviated as FAPE, referred to as FAPE, and you'll hear this term thrown around in your IEP meeting a lot. That is what the school district must offer to your child, free, appropriate public education. And we have to underline appropriate. It is not the best possible education. As parents, that is what we want, the best possible. But what the law requires is appropriate, and they're not necessarily the same thing. So you need to learn to use that language and not always ask for what's best, but ask for what is most appropriate for your child. Next, procedural safeguards. And you've probably gotten a document several times in the past, and you will several times in the future, something called procedural safeguards. And it's long and written in less than clear language, and most people just sort of throw them in a pile and don't really look at them. Sometime when you have nothing better to do, I don't know when that will ever be, but sometime you ought to pull them out and actually read them, because this is the document that spells out your and your child's rights and remedies to resolve conflicts. Next, participation. The law requires that you have access to records, that you have the right to participate in meetings, and you have to give consent to changes in the program to services provided. LRE, that's a term you'll also hear kicked around, least restrictive environment. And that means, to the extent possible, your child should be educated at their home school with typically developing peers. Now, that's not always possible, and sometimes children are placed in a special day class or a county-run program or something that is considered more restrictive, but the law is pushing towards least restrictive. That's considered the ideal. And finally, the IEP itself. The IEP is the program that is laid out for your child, and it's written down in a document that's presented to you and that you'll be asked to consent to. So it's both a plan, a program, and a document. And you'll be going through many IEP meetings and looking at many IEP documents before the end of your child's school career. So another thing to know about special education and the laws that govern it is that in order to qualify for special education, your child has to fit into one of 13 eligibility categories. And here I'll mention that in the PDF of this presentation that you got, all of these links should be live. So you should be able to click on the 13 eligibility categories and be taken to a place on our webpage that spells out what those are. It's important to remember that when the school assesses your child, they're not diagnosing a medical condition. They're determining whether they fit into one of these categories. So it's possible, for example, that your child is diagnosed with autism, but doesn't necessarily fit into the category called autistic-like behaviors that is established for IDEA. Uh, so that can happen. And so you have to remember there's a distinction between what the school is determining with its assessment uh, and what a medical doctor might determine through a medical examination. So there's 13 categories. We mentioned here there is a 14th established medical disability, but probably your child will not be fitting in that category at this point as they're 5 years old and moving into kindergarten. The other thing to remember is that the IEP process follows a specific order. And this is often obscure to parents, even though all IEP meetings are supposed to follow this order. Why it's laid out this way is sometimes not clear. But the idea is that you start with the assessment, and whether this is a triennial full assessment or just some informal assessment and um, observations by the child's previous teacher, you're going to lay out what the child is able to do now and what their needs are. Um, and then each of those needs, wherever there's something that is pointed out as being something that's of concern about your child's development or your child's ability to access kindergarten curriculum or later elementary school curriculum, those needs lead to goals being written. And goals will be written for what we expect your child to be able to accomplish during the next year, and then what kind of services are needed, and not just services, but also accommodations or modifications to the curriculum. What's needed to enable your child to meet those goals? And then finally, the last part of it is where is these services, where is this program best delivered? And that's the placement decision. So we have, again, here a link to an information packet on the individual education program, and you can access that document. We do also give trainings on that, although we've already done IEP basics for this year, and it'll be a little while before we do it again. But that, again, is a presentation that's available on our webpage. So you can get more information easily about that dives deeper into each of these concepts and IDEA law in general. So to continue, what we really want to get across to parents is that knowledge is power. The more familiar you are with your and your child's rights, the more empowered you'll feel, and the better you'll be able to participate in the process. Um, it's very important that you learn how to effectively communicate with your team. And we do also have an information packet on advocating for your child with special needs. And we also have a training just uh, oriented towards how to be a good advocate. Another thing we like to promote is that every county that we deal with has a community advisory committee. I think one of you are from Vallejo, and you know that Vallejo has a separate one, separate from the rest of Solano County. But in any case, these community advisory committees are supposed to bring together special ed teachers, parents of kids with special ed, and to really help provide guidance to the county's special education local plan area, or SELPA, and also just to help them become educated about what's going on locally in the special education realm. So this is a good thing to do if you have the time and energy to do it. It would be great. And most of these committees are meeting by Zoom now, which means you don't have to find childcare and drive someplace to a meeting. You can just sign on. And this is information that you can find on our webpage and also on the individual counties' SELPA web pages. So please access that information and think about joining your local CAC. Another thing to be aware of that may be a little different than the past for you if your kids have been um, in a special ed preschool or just working with the regional center before that, that who is responsible now for special education in your child? And it is the school district. You may have as your primary point of contact a case manager at your child's elementary school, the special education teacher that works with your child in class. You may be communicating with the principal or the school psychologist at that school. But remember, it's the school district that's ultimately responsible for your child getting services and getting an offer of free, appropriate public education. And usually it's the school district that's providing the program. This is not always the case, it's usually the case. Sometimes there is a program run by the County Office of Education. In Sonoma County, there's lots of what we call consortiums because there's so many small school districts that can't by themselves offer a full range of programs. So they get together in these consortiums so they can offer the full range. And a child might be going to a school that's not in their local district and maybe in an adjoining district that has the appropriate program. So it's a little different in different areas, but it's important to know that if you have concerns, that the district is who is responsible, and there is a special education director for your district that you can communicate with if you have concerns about what's being offered to your child. So I think Erica is going to run through the period of time before your child starts kindergarten.
Yes. And of course, today there's my neighbors doing construction. So I'm sorry if there's some background noise. So, what happens before your child starts kindergarten? So, some of the things that will happen before kindergarten is that you'll have a transition IEP meeting to discuss the transition to preschool. And if you haven't heard about this happening and it's getting towards early spring of the school year before your child's going to start kindergarten, that's something that you can begin to ask about to inquire when that will be scheduled for. If your child will be assessed for kindergarten readiness, then there are some specific timelines, and that assessment process can take some, a good period of time. So that's why, early spring is a good time to start thinking towards this process. Just to go over briefly the assessment timeline in general, and this would be any time you would ask for some sort of additional assessment for your child. If you ask in writing for an assessment, then the district or the school has 15 days to give you an assessment plan. And once you've agreed to that assessment plan, then there's a 60-day time window for those assessments to be completed, culminating in a meeting to discuss those assessments. So how would you know if your child needs an assessment? Well, there's some things to consider. You can think about when the last assessments might have been done. Were those last assessments a triennial assessment, which is a complete assessment, or another one? If your child was fairly recently assessed, then they may not need assessments before kindergarten. It's fairly likely that your child had a triennial assessment before or as a process of that transition from early start to preschool. So depending on exactly when those assessments happened, then they may not need to be reassessed before kindergarten. It may be perhaps during the kindergarten year before first grade that next triennial may happen. But if you feel that things have changed, or you have questions maybe about progress, where your child's present levels are, what they can do right now, or potentially placement, then that might be a reason to consider doing assessments before kindergarten. Some more things to consider. So, like I was just saying, checking with your preschool IEP team. Anyone who's interacted with your child, teachers, specialists, are there things that they're wondering about? Do they think it's time for a set of assessments? You can ask them about what your child needs to continue to learn and grow. You can record your observations that support what you think should be assessed. So that's where you can, if you're having some concerns, maybe you think things have changed, or you're not sure whether progress is where you think it could be for your child. That's where your observations, you're recording them, and then you're communicating that information to your team is going to be very important. Writing down your child's needs and then considering prioritizing them too. It may be that certain things need to happen before other things can happen. If you and we have a parent questionnaire and a goal setting worksheet that you can use for this
And
process as
I
well.
noticed we forgot to put the link in here, and we're sorry about
Okay.
that. And we'll we'll try to get that information to you.
Oh yes, it
But
says link, but it isn't a link.
yeah,
We can always help you find anything if you're looking for it. If you call our helpline, just to mention that again, if you're trying to find something on our website or something we mentioned, we can always help you find it. So then if you consider all these things and you decide that yes, you really think an assessment would be appropriate at this time and you would like to request that for your child, do ask for that in writing and keep a copy for yourself. And you're welcome to use our sample letter. We have a sample letter for assessment requests that I think this actually does link to here. And that assessment letter, what is kind of useful about it is that it kind of leads you through the process of saying, here are my concerns, here is why I'm concerned about these things, and here's what may have already been tried. Kind of shows you how to organize your thoughts around that. Okay, and back to you, Margaret.
okay. So we'll go on to the next slide. We've gotten into this a little bit. You want to request copies of whatever assessments have been done before the meeting. And it's also a good idea to ask for draft goals. These may or may not be ready to send to you. So there's no law that says you have to get these things before the IEP meeting. But if you ask early and you ask nicely in writing, you may get them, and this will help you be more prepared if you have that information in front of you. Um, as mentioned, write down your current observations and concerns about your child. Uh, and remember that coming into a meeting and saying, I have noticed my child is able to do this or not able to do that, and I've observed that and written it down, that becomes data. And that's much more effective sometimes than just sort of your parental worrying about things. So really documenting what you're seeing is very useful. And it also allows you to refer to these notes and questions as you review the assessments and you review the draft goals. And if possible, you can request brief pre-meeting conversations with specialists, such as the speech therapist or the OT or whoever else um, is going to be working with your child and who has perhaps assessed your child. Now, again, all of these folks are busy, and so they may or may not provide you with the time to talk to them before the meeting. Um, so this is something that's nice if you can make it happen. It's not required. And so if someone says, I just can't find the time to do it, they're not doing anything that's wrong, really. So this is something you're trying to get to, but just be aware it may or may not happen. But this is where it's really important to have your questions and concerns written down beforehand, because you will have access to these folks in the IEP meeting, and there's going to be a lot going on. If you don't have things written down, you may forget that question that you really wanted to ask. So, this is part of being prepared. Organize everything. And this is a real chore, but you're going to have lots of documents, lots of records, and putting everything together in some organized form is extremely important. And you're going to have to continue to do this year after year as your child has more reports, more notes, more work samples, etc. We have, an information packet on getting organized. Generally, what we ask parents to do is put everything together in a big 3-ring binder with tabs for here's the assessments, here's the IEP, here's the doctor's notes, whatever information you have. You may have some better way of doing it. In the digital world, you may be able to put everything on your iPad in some organized fashion. So feel free to do it that way if that's what works for you. The important thing is that you have all this information at your fingertips, so that you can review it before the meeting and maybe even refer to specific documents when you're in the meeting. So, however, you can best organize yourself, that's the thing to do. And then again, it's not just organizing your paper, it's organizing your thoughts. So, we have a toolkit on preparing for an annual or triennial IEP meeting, and that might be helpful to you in organizing your thoughts before the meeting. So then we're going to talk about what actually happens at the transition IEP meeting, and we can go forward to the next slide. So one thing to be aware of is this might be a long meeting. Um, Probably it will last more than an hour. How long it lasts may depend, at least in part, on whether there are triennial assessments uh, to be reviewed at that meeting, because reviewing those assessments ends up taking quite a lot of time. If there's not any new assessments, you'll still be looking at teacher observations and other informal assessments of your child's current abilities, what's called present levels. And you'll probably see some people that you've worked with in the past, some professionals you've worked with, and you'll see some other people who you've never met. So looking around the table, you may see both familiar and unfamiliar faces. It's important to think about how the meeting is run, and this varies a lot with how skilled the person who's being the mediator or the facilitator at the meeting, the person assigned to do that. uh, Usually it's either the case manager or the principal or someone like that who's running the meeting. But make sure that everybody does introduce themselves. If they don't, automatically ask, so that you know who everyone is and what their role is on the IEP team. Um, Ask at the beginning of the meeting, how much time have we allotted? And this is important because if you're expecting to have some conversation with a particular therapist or teacher, uh, but you want to hold that question to later in the meeting, and then a half an hour into the meeting, someone says, "Oh well, I have to go now. I have another appointment." That's very disconcerting. So find out at the beginning how much time is allotted and how much time everyone is expected to stay in the room and uh, actually work on the IEP. You should either take notes or have some with you who will take notes. Um, Someone from the IEP team will be assigned to take notes also, but you'll want to review the notes that are associated with the meeting to make sure that you agree that they're a good summary of what actually happened. And so having your own notes becomes important. Um, Sometimes you'll want to write down who said something. So it's important to have notes. You can take anyone you want with you to the IEP meeting. I think the law says anyone familiar with the child. So, that could be your next door neighbor, that could be your sister, uh, somebody that family friend, could be your partner. So, if there is someone available who can go with you and help you with this task, it's a good idea. Uh, it looks like somebody else is entering. Um, One thing to note is that it is allowable to record an IEP meeting if you ask at least 24 hours in advance. You can't spring this on the IEP team and come into the meeting and say, well, I'm going to record this, but you can ask in advance, 24 hours in advance. It should be in writing. And if you record the meeting, the school will probably also record the meeting. And sometimes this makes everybody a little more nervous and a little more restrained in what they say, which is not necessarily a good thing. So think about whether you really need a recording or not. Most people don't record meetings. Um, you can ask questions during the meeting. A lot of terms are going to be thrown out, ideas that you may not be familiar with. Ask for an explanation. Don't be shy about that. Uh, the professionals in the room have jargon that they normally use. You, as a parent, may not have become familiar with all that jargon yet. So don't hesitate to ask. It's normal. And then finally, take breaks if you need to. Sometimes in an IEP meeting, it becomes overwhelming. They're talking about your child, and it's normal to be emotional and concerned about your child and what's being said about your child. So if you feel yourself needing to take a break, don't hesitate to ask for it. It's much better to take a break in the middle of the meeting than to get upset and have a little breakdown because of that. So take care of yourself during the meeting as well. I think we've mentioned before there's an order to how the meeting is supposed to go. And one of the first things that is supposed to be covered in the meeting is a statement of parents' concerns. So, you'll say what your main concern for your child is, and that will be written down in the IEP document. It's probably a good idea for you to write your own statement before the meeting and either send it to the IEP team beforehand or, you know, provide it in writing at the meeting. Not a book, nothing more than a page and probably considerably less. 2 or 3 sentences is usually a pretty good rule of thumb for this. But it's good for a statement of what you are most concerned about with your child's transition to kindergarten. So, you may be mostly concerned about social development, for example. I'm concerned my child will be able to make friends. I'm concerned my child might be bullied. Um, those may be your primary concerns, or you may have as your primary concern your child's issues with learning. I'm concerned that he hasn't seemed to be able to learn any of his letters, and so that's a real concern that I want him to be able to do that during kindergarten. So whatever it is, just write it down so that your statement, rather than somebody else's interpretation of your concerns, can be put into the IEP. The next thing that's going to be covered is present levels, and this will include the presentation of assessment results if there are any. If there are no formal assessment reports, there still will be information based on the observation primarily of teachers that have worked with your child in the past, saying, what your child is capable of now, what they're able to do now, what is their present level. And then after that's discussed, based on what the present levels are and where there are areas of concern where your child is not developing as quickly or learning as well as one might expect a child of his or her age, then goals will be developed. And there will be a goal on each of these areas of need. And the goal will say, by this time next year, I'll list a date, by that time, Johnny should be able to write all of his uppercase and lowercase levels, something like that. And how will we measure this? We will measure this by teacher observation on 4 of 5 occasions or something of that sort. So there'll be a statement of what your child should be able to do a year from now and how it's going to be observed, how we're going to determine whether that goal is actually met. And then next year, when you have your next IEP meeting, they'll review those goals to see if they actually were met. Based on the goals that are established, then there'll be a discussion of services. What kind of specialized instruction is going to be provided? If they're getting speech therapy, how often? How long? 30 minutes twice a week, something of that sort. Is it going to be individual therapy or group therapy? All of these things should be discussed and how they're related to what your child's needs are. Finally, the last decision, the last discussion is where this is going to take place. What is the placement that the IEP team is recommending for your child? It's very, very common for parents to go into an IEP meeting with that placement question being the most important thing to them. And if you don't understand that this is the order that the discussion is supposed to go in, it can be confusing and frustrating that most of the meeting has gone on and that question has not yet been addressed. So do remember that that's the last part of the discussion that's supposed to be happening in the meeting, not the first. So you've gone through this long meeting. Someone has, if you are physically there, they will have placed this pile of paper in front of you. I'm not sure exactly how that's happening with Zoom meetings, but perhaps they've sent you a digital form of the IEP document, and you're going to be asked to sign it. Now, when we were all getting together physically in the room, you'd probably be asked to sign it right then and there. That's not going to be possible if you're having a Zoom meeting. Right. The question is whether or not you should sign it. And you do have to remember that you're not required to sign that you consent with the IEP immediately at that meeting or right after the meeting if it's a Zoom meeting. There's two things you'll be asked to sign. One is an attendance list. So, of course, you're present at the meeting, you sign the attendance list, as does everybody else that was there. But then there's a part where they're asking you to consent to what's in the IEP document. And the first checkbox is essentially that I agree with everything in this document. That's not the only option. It's not a take it or leave it. There is an option to agree to part, but not all of the document. So you may have to think about this seriously. You might want to review all the paperwork. In fact, you probably do. We generally recommend that you not sign at the IEP meeting, even if you think the meeting went wonderfully well and you think you're agreeing with everything. You should take time to actually read over this IEP document. You should think about it as though you're signing a contract. It's not really exactly a contract, but you need to think of it in those terms. What is it that I am agreeing to? So be sure you know what it is you're agreeing to. And there may be things that got overlooked, thoughts that or information that you think ought to be in there that isn't. So read it carefully, see whether you agree with it in completely or in part. You have to remember that the school district is not supposed to be providing services to your child until you have given your written consent. So if you agree to most of the IEP, but there's a couple little sticking points, it's best to say, I agree with the exception of, and then write down what your exceptions are. What is it that you're not agreeing with, but agree to everything else? Now, on the IEP document, you'll just see one little tiny line that for you to write in exceptions, but you can always attach a piece of paper and initial it that spells out what your concerns are. If you've gotten this IEP document and you just you're struggling with the decision of whether to sign it, whether to agree in whole or in part, feel free to call us and we'll help you think through that decision. We're not going to tell you what to do. It's not our job to tell you what the right answer is, but we can help you think about what the questions are and what sorts of things you should be considering when you come, you make that decision. And we've looked at a lot of IEP documents and a lot of assessments, so we're pretty familiar with this, and we can help you think about it and help you strategize and help you consider what your decision might be. And then finally, one of the things that you're going to be discussing at this IEP meeting is what the team is recommending for placement. You're supposed to have the opportunity to visit that placement, to observe it for yourself, to see whether you think it's appropriate. And since they're just making that recommendation at the meeting usually, you may not have had the chance to do that. So you might want to have that scheduled and go make that observation prior to signing the IEP document. So Eric is going to tell you a little bit more about thinking about placement and the placement decision.
All right, thoughts on placement. So like Margaret was saying, although the placement discussion comes at the end of the IEP meeting and sort of the end of the IEP process, it's often the top thing on parents' minds and the most important thing to them. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about placement. And whenever children make a transition of school in any way, placement is the concern that many of us have as parents of children receiving special education. So it's natural to be concerned and to have a lot of thoughts and questions about placement. So some things about placement. This term or this phrase, continuum of options, the IEP team is required by IDEA to review with you what options there might be for placement that would meet your child's needs. If they only discuss a single option, you might ask what other placement options they considered and why they ruled those out. They may certainly have had that discussion or had thoughts on it. Maybe it's very clear to them, but you can ask what that thought process was and what other placements were considered. The district will make an offer of the one option likely that they believe is most appropriate for your child. And again, you can certainly have questions about why that's most appropriate. So here's some more detail about potential placement options. So a general education kindergarten classroom with what you would call either pull-outs or push-ins for services or support. So what that would look like would be your child being in the general education kindergarten class, and then if they have something like speech in their IEP, a speech service, then the speech therapist would come get them, once or twice a week, pull them out. So that's the pull out service, maybe to go to a special, the speech therapist's little classroom, however they do that, maybe on their own, maybe with a couple other kids. That could also be the case for something like occupational therapy. Then there's push in, which would be either in addition to or instead of something like that, where the speech therapist would come into the classroom and work with the kids in the classroom. It might not look like that speech therapist is even particularly working with your child. In that case, they might be doing something with the whole class, and it could benefit other kids in the class, but it might be that it actually is specifically tailored to your kid or maybe a couple of children that need that support. So in line with IDEA and least restrictive environment, that general education classroom provides a lot of access to typically developing peers. In fact, the time when they wouldn't be accessing their typically developing peers would just be when they were in those pull-out time periods. And if there was just push in, then they would have that least restrictive environment would really be you could think of that as being called very inclusive. Inclusion is another word that people use to generally refer to that. Some benefits of inclusion is that there can be experiences with peers, potentially modeling learning and positive behaviors. However, sometimes that inclusion can also be stressful for children with special needs. They may feel that there's a lot of demands on them, even with some supports and services. So although least restrictive environment is sort of an ideal or what's aimed for, it's certainly not appropriate in every situation. Another placement option is the special day class option. That's where most of the day would be spent in a special day class setting. So that is often a classroom on a school campus, a separate classroom. And that classroom would have a special education teacher, so someone who has specialized training. The other students in that classroom would have IEPs as well, although possibly with different types of needs. And it's likely to be a smaller group of kids or a higher teacher to student ratio, if you want to think about that. So fewer kids, more either teacher or assistants. This is for students that would require more of a highly specialized or direct instruction. And students may be more easily taught in this situation. They've got a special education teacher, potentially fewer distractions and more focused learning. Although, again, that's not always the case. A lot of this depends on the particular classroom, the group of children, and the teachers that are running that classroom. So we're also going to mention transitional kindergarten, which is somewhat more recent. And depending on your district, there's different situations with transitional kindergarten. It is a part of the general public education school system. It's considered the first of a 2-year kindergarten program that has a modified kindergarten curriculum for the first year that's more age appropriate to younger or not quite old enough to be kindergartners. Districts must offer a TK program, but they may not have it at every school site. So if you're in a district that has multiple elementary schools, there may be a TK for one of those elementary schools, but it may not be your neighborhood one. And that's something that's pretty important to people. And generally, children are eligible for TK. It's those kids who have their 5th birthday between September 2nd and December 2nd. So it used to be that you could start in kindergarten if you turned 5 by December 2nd, but then they slowly pushed that back to needing to turn 5 by September 1st. So that's when the TK came in to kind of catch those kids that maybe used to be just the real young kindergartners, but now they're really too young to start a regular kindergarten class until the next year. But a child with an IEP can be placed in a TK classroom regardless of their age. So it's considered a placement option for a a child with an IEP. So that's kind of a different way that they would be in that classroom. Okay, and then non-public schools, which is a really confusing name for a school. It's sometimes people just call that an NPS. So these are a certain type of private school that are certified by the California Department of Education. And they are then an educational placement. They're a placement option for special education students. And in this case, these students would be considered to have needs that cannot be met in the public school setting, either in a special day class or a general education classroom with supports. I have a note here that there are 369 non-public schools that are certified in California, so we have quite a few. As students that are placed at non-public schools they have an IEP, and that non-public school must be appropriate to meet the needs that are displayed in their IEP. And there has to also be a determination and sort of an accounting for the fact that the public school system can't provide for that student in the general education or on in a special day class, that they really need this more exceptional placement. The school district then places the child in the NPS as their placement and pays for that special education service. Parents can privately place their child in an NPS. I don't know if that's the case for all non-public schools, but it's something that you can do that and then ask the school to pay for it. It's certainly complicated and may not turn out the way that you're hoping in terms of having that be paid for. You can call us if you're looking at sort of getting close to considering that. Non-public school placement is rare. It exists in the special education world, but it is more rare because of that least restrictive environment priority. It's even more rare in kindergarten because in kindergarten, there hasn't been that opportunity to observe whether the child could be supported either in the general education classroom or in the special day class. There isn't as much information as a child that might have had more time in the school system. So what is appropriate for your child? Well, your child's needs and strengths are evaluated through the IEP process, and that's something that you're involved in as well. And how do those strengths and needs fit with the particular program? That's the appropriate, whether it's appropriate. And of course, that is a term that has gray area. It's not an easy yes or no answer. Try to listen to the recommendations of the teachers and specialists who have worked with your child, and keep an open mind. Remember to have your child's interest at heart rather than perhaps a fixed position. And this is a concept that we talk about in a lot of our trainings. And having a position is really sort of saying that there's one way that you want things done. So, for example, if your child has some speech needs, having a fixed position might be that you want your child to have group speech twice a week, individual speech once a week. You want it to happen in the afternoon, and you want a certain speech teacher, a certain speech therapist to be the one that does it. So that would be a position. If you're coming at it from a perspective of an interest, your interest would be in having your child make progress in their speech and progress on their speech goals. Now, it may be that the position that you have is appropriate, and that's what is determined to be the path forward. Or it may be that there's other ideas, and you may want to have your child try them before you decide to just say no because it wasn't your position. So remembering to work, and even if you have that position in mind that you're thinking of, to have the discussion from that point of interest is also just going to help your communication. And then to remember what worked for your neighbor's child might not be appropriate for your child. I know, in my experience, anytime you're talking to people about schools, you're going to find, if you talk to enough people, you're going to find someone who had an amazing experience at that school and someone who had a dreadful experience at that school. And even if that was the case last year, that might not be the case this year because there might be new teachers. I know when my son was first going to kindergarten, we had the classroom picked out. We had this really experienced teacher doing this multi-age program. Boy, we had it all figured out. And then the week before school started, that teacher was promoted to a different position. Half the kids left the class and nothing was as we expected. So just to keep in mind to make your own, to try to make your own determinations, your own observations, and don't rely too heavily on what may have happened in someone else's family. All right, so now we get to visiting. The IEP team has recommended a kindergarten placement for your child. Now what? Well, hopefully you get to visit. Now, this presentation, we're not speaking specifically to this strange time that we're all living in, where we're doing work and school and everything from home. Although I know that's also varies by county. In Sonoma County, we are all still very much at home. So I hope that's different for some of you, but I know it may not be. So in general times, this would mean visiting an actual classroom. In these days, it may actually mean, I guess, visiting through a Zoom visit or through seeing things through video. Hopefully, for those of you who have children who are going to be transitioning to kindergarten, I'm hoping for all of you that that's next fall and that things are back to normal by then. So in that case, hopefully you'll be able to maybe visit late in the spring and see what the actual classroom is like. So anytime you're considering a placement, and if as your child is going through school, their placement is reconsidered or there's something happening, it's always great to visit that placement option. And this goes again to what I was just saying on the last slide about not necessarily taking what someone else has had an experience of. You really want to see and be in that classroom for yourself or as close as you can to it with your child in mind. That also gives you the opportunity, if you're there and or maybe you even think, I don't think this is going to be, great. I've heard about this classroom. All right. So you go and either you change your mind. Oh, actually, this teacher is different than I expected, or whatever it is, and you are open to it. And so that's great. Or you see, oh, you know what, this really actually isn't going to be appropriate for my child. Well, then that's your opportunity to make those observations and those notes, and then bring it back to your child's needs and what is in their IEP about them, so that you now have that data basically to talk about why you don't think it's necessarily a good placement. All right, that was kind of went off there, but let's see what I have to cover here. So keeping in mind whether your child's needs will be addressed. When you're visiting in a kindergarten classroom, something that's a little different from maybe visiting preschool is that those children will not be in that classroom the next year unless it's a multi-age class. So you're seeing a teacher and a group of kids. Hopefully you're getting to see the teacher that may be there next year, but certainly the children won't be the same because they will have moved on to first grade. Also, always trying to not compare, students and kids to other kids. That's just generally probably unavoidable, but avoid it if you can. Again, the teachers can change from year to year, and actually class locations can change from year to year, especially if it's something like Margaret was mentioning, a consortium classroom or a county office of education classroom. Those can be moved around while still sort of maintaining the same structure and focus. What you should, even though some of those things may change, the students, even potentially the, the location, some things you should be able to get from visiting. What is the learning environment and the structure of the class? And what type of learning activities? You can see whether it's going to be basically, a lot of sitting at desks, or is there a lot of circle time? Is there different stations that the children are moving around to? What is the type of staffing? Is there a teacher with an assistant, with multiple aides? Is it only just a teacher, perhaps? You can also get a feel for what type of family involvement there is. You can see if there's signups on the wall, or is there a parent in the classroom helping perhaps while you're there, or multiple parents. You can kind of do a little detective work and see if you can get a feel for the parent involvement. Of course, you can also ask the teacher what opportunities there would be if that's something you're interested in. You may also be able to get a feel for the parent-teacher communication. That might be a little harder to get a feel for from visiting, but that's certainly something you can try to get some information on by talking to the teacher. Again, you may see, oh, there's a sign up. The teacher looks like they have open hours every Tuesday after school for parents to sign up, that kind of thing. And then we have the parent observation guidelines for kindergarten programs. So you're also welcome and encouraged to consult as you're visiting a potential kindergarten. All right, and let's see. So visiting, what if you don't agree? So you've gone to visit the potential placement. You have decided, you know what, you don't really think it's going to meet your child's needs. What do? You can call an IEP meeting to discuss this, remembering communication, collaboration, and cooperation, and really being specific about your concerns. So what did you see in the class? What conversations did you have with the teacher? What specifically do you feel was not appropriate about the class for your child's particular situation? And again, trying to connect those concerns to the information in the IEP about your child. What about the classroom does not fit with those needs, with your child's needs and with your concerns? So relating those concerns to the environment, that's a great place to start having that discussion about whether a different placement might be considered. So what if you still don't agree? So you've maybe gone through that step, you've had you've had the next IEP meeting, it doesn't seem like you are in agreement with the IEP team. While you have options. You can certainly give us a call and talk about those. You can look in your procedural safeguards. There's actually information in those procedural safeguards about what to do if you disagree. In general, it's most appropriate to try to resolve your conflict starting at the lowest level, or that would be the closest level. So at the school level, the classroom level, the school level, the district level, at that point before you perhaps go to a higher level. Okay, thank you for listening to me for all that time. I get to go back to Margaret.
What if you've agreed with the program, you've now signed the IEP, and you think everything is ready? There's a few things to check on. First of all, be sure you have actually registered your child with the school district. Now, you've probably already done this, but double check, make sure they're actually registered. Then you'll want to make sure that the school has all the records they need, like health reports, immunization, uh, medication your child takes. This is especially true if they need to give your child medication at school, but it's also just good for the school to know what your child is taking, even if they're taking it before they leave home in the morning. Certainly, the emergency contact information. If anything happens and they need to get a hold of you, it's important that they know how to do that quickly. Um, Keep communication with the IEP team open and honest. And I noticed there's a typo here. Sorry about that. The T got left off of honest. Um, and then, if you have concerns, bring them up. Bring them up sooner rather than later. Don't just sit on your concerns. Bring them up with the team. You may have signed an agreement and things have begun. Your child is in the kindergarten classroom, um, but maybe you're just not satisfied with the way things are going. It could be that you're not seeing your child progressing. Um, it may be that, a month or two into the school year, all the goals that have been laid out for your child have met. Well, then maybe they weren't appropriate goals. Maybe they were too easy, the bar was set too low. That's something that can happen. Um, there may be a related service that you think is needed but has not been offered. And a good example here is OT. Um, there's not going to be an OT assessment until your child has been determined to be eligible. So it's often not happening at the same time as other assessments. But your child is in the classroom now, and you think that in order for your child to progress, they need some OT service. Well, that would be something to ask for, and if necessary, have a meeting to discuss. Um, there could be other things going on at school. Maybe a behavior problem has cropped up that wasn't there before. Maybe your child has become very, very anxious about going to school and has become resistant to going to school. These are things you'd want to have a meeting to discuss and figure out how they can be resolved. So if you think another IEP meeting is needed, um, ask for it in writing, and the school must hold that meeting within 30 days. Now, uh, maybe something drastic has happened and you want an emergency meeting. Certainly ask that a meeting be held on an emergency basis sooner than 30 days if you think it's really, really important. But just remember that what the law provides is the meeting must be held within 30 days. So anything less than that is really, um, if you've communicated to the school and the school has agreed that it's really important to do it sooner. The other thing to be aware of is you're not going to be the most popular parent with your IEP team if you're calling an IEP meeting every 30 days. These meetings are hard to schedule. Uh, they take a lot of time of the professionals. So it's important not to call an IEP meeting if you don't really need one. And what do I mean by that? Well, maybe there's just something you need to talk about with the kindergarten teacher. Well, then, ask for an appointment with the kindergarten teacher. Maybe it's just with a speech therapist. Well, if you can, then set up a phone call or a meeting with that speech therapist. It's if you really feel like the program itself isn't working or that you really need additional services for your child. That's when you have an IEP meeting. So think about what kind of meeting, what kind of communication is going to work. If you really think that the program isn't working and something needs to be changed, you really need an amendment to the IEP, then don't hesitate to write that letter or that email and say, I would like to have another IEP meeting and and one will be scheduled. So what do you expect in kindergarten? Um, we've talked about different types of programs. Um, they may all be a little bit different, but all should provide for developmentally appropriate instruction and experience. And the kids learn, as you know, not just through, the teacher talking to them. They're learning through play, they're learning through developing relationships with their peers and interacting with their peers. They learn through the environment that they're exposed to, and they learn through direct instruction from adults. So all of these things are important in in the preschool program, not just the direct instruction. And most parents of younger kids get this, but this is true throughout school. It's not just whatever academic program there is. It really is the social environment and how your child is learning to be uh, the member of a peer group, the person who's participating in society. So those social interactions and uh, being in an environment that they can thrive in, these are important things as well as the kind of instruction they're receiving. There's some general information on kindergarten enrollment, age considerations, etc. Here is a live link to the Department of Education in which some of these things are discussed. And also, and I'll just make a brief mention of this, there is the California Common Core Standards. And I'm sure you've heard of the Common Core Standards, and there may be a lot of controversy around them. But one thing that they can really help you with is to understand what is expected of the typically developing child at different ages, at different grade levels, what they should be expected to be able to do and learn. And so sometimes it's very important to look at these Common Core standards just to get a sense of, if your child was the typical child, what would be expected of them. And to remember that goals are supposed to relate to those Common Core standards. So the goal is to have your child be able to meet Common Core standards. Now, sometimes that's possible, and sometimes, uh, based on the severity of the disability, it may not be possible. But that is sort of the standard that's set up, the goal that's there. So knowing what those standards are uh, can be important to you. And you can find these online. Again, these are live links in your PDF, and you should be able to access them. What to expect in kindergarten and beyond. So things that are different. There's going to be a recess. Is it going to take place just with the kids in his classroom or with other elementary grades? Now, during the current COVID environment, if your child is physically going to a school, they are likely to only be with that specific classroom and not mix with other classrooms. But when we get beyond this, there may be a school situation where at recess, kindergartners are interacting with older kids. So that's just something to be aware of and to find out about. And if you have concerns, express those concerns. Again, if you have an extended day in your uh, child's kindergarten experience, there will be a lunch period. So, how is that supervised? Again, are they just with their own group or are they grouped with older kids at the lunch period? So, these are just things to be aware of. Bathroom location. Probably in preschool, the bathroom was in or immediately adjacent to the classroom. This may not be the case in kindergarten. Uh, and there may be different expectations in different classrooms as to how independent a child should be about going to the bathroom and managing toileting independently. Um, there there may be different considerations in a special day class than in the general education classroom. Another thing to be aware of. Um, Find out what the best means of communicating with your concerns to the teacher. You'll want to have communication back and forth. Work out some kind of system with the teacher. And often this is email. Even in the pre-COVID times, email was often the best way for a parent and teacher to, give information to one another about whether your child had a good day, how his behavior was, whether there's concerns about things he should be working on. These are the sorts of things that usually are pretty easily communicated via email. It's not a good idea at the time you're dropping off your child to expect the teacher to have a conversation with you. Um, he or she is going to have other things. They're getting ready for their day. They're trying to make sure all the kids are supervised. And so this is not a good time to try to have a conversation. Um, Look into what volunteer opportunities there might be. Um, if you want to be in the classroom and want to volunteer, most teachers are very open to that and encourage that. Not all will. But if you are a volunteer in the classroom, be aware that you're there for all the kids, not just to be, a special attendee to your own child. Another thing to be aware of, uh, special education can change based on your child's changing needs. Um, the eligibility may be changed, and it's possible that when your child was younger, they needed services, and then they caught up developmentally and they no longer need them. And so it is possible for this question about whether they're eligible for special ed services to come up again, and some kids are exited. Um, and sometimes kids are exited because it appears they've caught up, but as the curriculum gets more difficult, more intense later on, the problems exhibit themselves again, and the child needs to be reassessed and perhaps re-enter special education. So that those changes can happen. I would say they're not really common. Often, if a child is made eligible at this early age, in all likelihood they're going to remain eligible, but not necessarily. Things can change. And I think Erica is going to talk to you a little bit about preparing for the first day of school.
Okay, preparing your child and yourself. And this may be different if you've had, maybe an older child that's already gone off to school, or if this is your first child going to school. You may have some different feelings about this yourself and your child as well. If they've seen older brother or sister or neighbors or cousins go off to school, they may have a bit more idea of what they're getting into. I can't remember. I wanted to tell you guys this story I had heard. It's all about I couldn't remember where I had heard it, but all about a the parents. They got their child all ready for the first day of school. They talked about how the first day of school was going to be and all this, and the kid went and they did it, and they came home, and then they were completely shocked the next day when they had to go back again. They're like, wait, I thought that was it. So anyway, this is preparing for the first day, but also the rest of the days as well. So talking to your child, you're trying to give them information maybe in pieces or in chunks so that they can to better manage and process that, maybe beginning even in late spring and sharing more information as the spring and summer goes on. But you also have an understanding of how your child best takes in information. You may think, well, there's some things that I want to talk to them about earlier, and there's some things I'm going to hold off on. Some topics that you might want to cover before school start, they might have questions like, well, what will they do? Who will be there? How will they get there? How will you find them after school? Will they take a bus, which some kids are extremely excited about. For some kids, I think the bus is the whole point, while others would be, very apprehensive about the bus part. And you could also talk about the ways that kindergarten might be the same as preschool and the ways that might be different from preschool. They also may be very interested in what the food situation is going to be. What's snack time? What's lunchtime going to be like? You can visit for sure. And then while you're visiting, you can take pictures so that then you can look at those pictures together. And that can really build up some familiarity. When, if you can visit the classroom, again, in normal times, teachers or schools might have an open house for incoming kindergartners the spring before, or you might have to arrange that yourself. At the very least, I mean, if you know where the campus is, especially if it's somewhere you can, if it's a campus that might be open to just walk around on the weekends or the afternoons, just getting that familiarity. More specifically, what route will they take from where they get dropped off to the classroom? Will they walk that by themselves or will they be walked there? Where the bathroom is, super important. If the playground, if you can go play on the playground during off school hours, then that's really great. Meeting the teacher before the first day and visiting the classroom, certainly if that's possible, can be very helpful. Again, taking pictures of the teacher, pictures of the classroom. You can even make a little booklet of pictures, actually in a little photo album, because those are more rare these days. That can be really fun. You can also tell them a story, tell them the story about what it's going to be like when they go. You can tell a story about what it's like when, Mr. Mouse goes to school, whatever it is what it was like maybe when you went to school for the first time, or maybe grandma or grandpa even. There are so many library books. You can certainly ask your librarian about going to kindergarten or going to school library books. There are, like I said, so many. The Kissing Hand, I know that was one of the ones when my kids were little, about this little raccoon that's nervous about going off to school. And the mama gives the raccoon a kiss in the palm of his little raccoon hand, and he holds on to that kiss all day long. And then, of course, the mom might be the one who needs the kiss to hold on to all day long as well. If there's a bus involved, again, maybe books about riding a bus, maybe even a little bus toy to play with, and then gathering items for the first day. First day of school clothes is pretty kind of a common expected thing. They might need a lunch bag or a backpack. Any special supplies, that can be very exciting. That can, kind of be the whole point for some kids. And then maybe there can be a special event the first day. Maybe it's just getting ice cream or getting to play a favorite game, maybe going to the park after school, going out for pizza, something to kind of celebrate that first day. Some other tips from parents, giving the teacher a one-page summary about your child, that can be super helpful. Maybe a few things about their family, their home life, maybe their pets, their interests, what their strengths and maybe their challenges are. If it seems appropriate to you, if your child is in a general education classroom, I've been in a class where another family shared a one-page sheet about their child with other parents. And this was actually really helpful because the other parents, could kind of see maybe that something was going on with this little guy, but didn't really know. And I thought it was a really interesting idea to share that with the other parents. But certainly with the teacher. You're also telling them maybe about how their disability affects them, especially if they have a more rare situation. The teacher may not be familiar with their specific situation, or even if it's not a rare situation, your child is going to be uniquely impacted by their challenges. And then any special circumstances you need the teachers or staff to be aware of. And I'll just give you an example. When my son was this age, he had these orthotic ankle braces that went kind of halfway up his legs and didn't bother him at all. But if he was going to have to take off his socks and shoes for any reason, that would have been like a half-hour procedure. So, that was something to just clarify with the teacher. Okay, if the kids are going to be taking off their socks and shoes for anything, let's maybe not have them do that. And what's going to maybe be the communication between you and him about what he's going to do in that situation. Taking pictures, it's nice to have that front, front of the house off to school picture, maybe arriving at school, maybe a picture with the teacher if your child wants that, or if you do. And then if there's busing involved, especially if there's special education busing, I hope it goes smoothly for you. I'll just say that. Try to confirm, know who to call if you have a bus question. Um, that's my that's my advice from one parent to another. All right, making sure your child's extra special needs might be covered. We talked about that a little bit, but if there is there any equipment that they're going to need, any specialized equipment, any particular foods? Is there something that needs to be on hand at the school that maybe you need to get a second set of something that they might need? Certainly a change of clothes. I would say probably most kindergarten teachers would have kids have a spare change of clothes for all their kiddos. But if not, you might choose to do that anyway. Or you may decide that you want to get a call if your child has some sort of situation where they've gotten wet enough or messy enough that they need a change of clothes. Maybe you want to call in that situation. Once you've tried to think of everything and you've forgotten something, don't worry, it happens. You can't think of everything. You'll maybe remember next time. Don't worry about it. And hopefully you can plan to do something nice for yourself on that first day. I guess reality is a lot of folks are just, going to work or taking care of another little one. But if you can try to have a moment to just breathe and mark the significance of the day and maybe give yourself a little break. Hopefully you can have positive energy and just think about how well your child is doing. In all likelihood, they're going to have a great day and they're going to just be excited to go back the next day. And you'll probably have missed them a lot more than they've missed you. And that's back to you, Margaret, a little bit more about self-care.
So self-care is something we like to always have parents think about because in order to take care of your child and all of the additional needs that your child may have, you really have to take care of yourself too. Um, Self-care is not selfish. It is really making sure you're in the space to be available to your child and to be able to meet your child's needs. And this transition is an intense experience, but it's not one that's going to last a long time. Um, the transition's made, then your kid is in kindergarten. And so a lot of those anxieties and concerns about the transition will go away shortly after your child has actually made that transition. And your feelings about it are going to change over time too. It's important at this age to embrace the moment, appreciate every second you have with their kindergartner because pretty soon they're going to be a first grader and pretty soon they're going to be in middle school. It goes by really, really quickly. So don't forget to enjoy the moments now while they're happening. Um, Seek support. If you can find a support group that will help you in either navigating the process or just uh, meeting with other parents who have similar needs with your own child, that's great. So whatever support you can get, um, very important. And if you don't have a support group, maybe you can start one. Um, you know, maybe just getting to know the other parents in your child's classroom better through going out, taking a walk together, having a coffee together, something um, that can be very helpful to, to to have somebody to talk about what's going on and your concerns. So, we also have these standard self-care uh, points that you should address with yourself. Of course, getting plenty of rest, exercise. It's important to remember that you need to have time in your day for something enjoyable and go ahead and schedule it. Whatever it is, even if it's only 15 minutes, put it in your calendar and make sure you actually do it. Um, it's great to say, "Oh, I love to go for a walk, but I just don't have time today." Make the time to do it. Eating healthy, of course, is important. Another thing that's really important is to figure out who's supporting you and who isn't so supportive. Amongst your friends, your family, there are going to be those people who are always encouraging you and giving you hope and helping you hope for the best for your child. And there'll be those people who are naysayers or who are negative, who are not making you feel better. So, spend time with the ones that are being good for you, who are encouraging you, and spend as little time possible with those family members and friends who aren't helping you. We always recommend mindfulness based stress reduction to parents. Many organizations give classes. Um, we have at times given these classes specifically for parents of kids with special needs. We have not figured out a good way to do that via Zoom, and we also need uh, specialized funding. It's not part of our normal tasks in the grants we receive, so we have to get additional funding to be able to do it. But if we are able to offer a class, if you're on our mailing list, you will hear about it. Uh, and at this time, as I've said, mindfulness classes work best in person. You may be able to find some over Zoom. Um, and there's lots of apps you can get that just guide you through a little bit of mindfulness or meditation. It's really been one of the ways that have shown to reduce stress better than almost anything else. So think about making use of these mindfulness techniques. Um, of course, try not to feel guilty. You can't do everything all of the time, and don't beat yourself up about it. Be gentle on yourself. Get used to asking for help from other people because people usually are quite willing to help, and you have a bigger job than most parents. If your child has special needs, there's all sorts of things you need to learn and all sorts of things you need to attend to that most parents won't have to do, and you deserve help and you should ask for it. Try not to give in to resentment or in frustration. It's We all do sometimes, but as little as possible, and make all of these self-care tips, make all of these things a habit, so you're helping yourself all the time. And remember, your child is watching how you respond to change and stress, and you're being a role model. So the more you can do it with calmness and positivity, the better role model you're going to be for your child. Remember, this is a big transition. Your child is jumping from the smaller pond into the larger pond. It's a big change for your family, but if you prepare yourself, if you plan with care, it will, in all likelihood, be a positive experience for you and for your child. So jump on in. The water is fine. At this point, it's time to think about what you've learned, whether there's a skill you hope to improve, whether you need more resources, whether you need more support, and where you need more, how to get it. And we're here to help you do that. So please call upon us. We just will mention again that we're parent advisors. We're not attorneys. We're not advocates. So we don't give legal advice and we don't tell you what you should do. We try to provide you with support and information, help you learn about your rights, find referrals and resources so that you can become the best advocate you can for your child. That's our goal, is to help you in your role rather than to do it for you. And we are getting some funding from the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and from the California Department of Education. We really appreciate the federal and state funding, but it's not enough. And we do also raise money and we do accept donations. So if you feel like you can give us a donation, we would truly appreciate it. If you can't, that's fine too. We do try to keep all of our services free to parents.